For 7 years, Elias Thorne had made only one mistake. The mistake was not in a trade, nor a treaty, nor in the complex architecture of pressure and influence that he managed for men whose names were histories in themselves. His mistake was a person. He had treated a person like a system that could be optimized, upgraded, and, if necessary, replaced. The consequence of this single, profound error was not a market crash or a border dispute. It was silence. A silence that began in his own home and was now echoing through the foundations of his world. It had been 12 hours since he realized she was gone, and the silence was getting louder. The final verdict on his failure had not come from one of his powerful clients or a rival. It came from a tired, overworked doctor in a provincial clinic, a man he had never met before and would never see again. 7 words from a man who had no idea the weight they carried. She was the only one paying attention. Elias had paid for everything else. He had bought loyalty, security, and silence. But attention, he had discovered, had no price. It could only be given. And now, the person who had given it freely was gone. And he was beginning to understand that he would have to chase that attention to the ends of the earth just to understand what he had lost. By the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? The discovery had not been dramatic. There was no slammed door, no tear-stained note. Anya Sharma did not operate in the currency of melodrama. Her departure was a study in precision. Elias had returned to his private residence, the one place in the world not listed on any corporate registry or government filing. The sanctuary she had built and maintained for him. He had expected the low lights, the scent of bergamot and old books, the quiet hum of the air filtration system that managed his chronic inflammatory condition. He had expected the small handwritten note on the kitchen island detailing the organic market delivery and a reminder about his call with the finance minister of a small but critical nation-state. He had expected her presence as a quiet, constant force, the silent administrator of his life. Instead, he found the lights off. The air was still and smelled of nothing. And on the cold marble of the island, there was a single, slim folio. Not a note, but a document. It was a complete operational handover. Passwords for the utilities, contact information for the building supervisor, a final, reconciled household expense report. It was the kind of document a facilities manager would leave for their successor. It was impersonal, meticulous, and absolutely final. His first reaction was not panic, but a deep, rolling wave of irritation. It was inefficient, disruptive. He had a dozen more critical things to manage. He had calls to make, pressures to apply, a delicate balance of global interests to maintain. He reached for his secure phone to call his chief of staff, Marcus Vance, to begin the tedious process of finding a replacement. But before he could, the phone rang. It was a number he knew by heart, the private line of a shipping magnate in Singapore, a man whose allegiance was essential to a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure deal Elias was structuring. Elias? The man's voice was clipped, devoid of the usual warmth. Something has come up, a matter of confidence. We're pulling our support, effective immediately. The line went dead before Elias could form a question. He stared at the phone. A matter of confidence. The phrase was a sanitized weapon in their world. It meant trust had been broken. But he had done nothing to break it. He had managed the man's family crisis in Dubai just 3 months prior, flawlessly and with total discretion. He was about to dial his contact in Singapore to diagnose the problem when another call came in. A banker from Zurich. The message was nearly identical. A different accent, the same cold finality. A third followed from a technology investor in Seoul. The words varied, but the theme was constant. A loss of confidence, a change in risk assessment, an unforeseen complication. By the fourth call, the irritation had curdled into a cold, unfamiliar dread. These men were not connected. Their only common link was him. And the only thing that had changed in his world, the only variable, was the quiet woman who had just vacated his home with the efficiency of a ghost. He looked again at the handover document. It was dated 3 months ago. She had been planning this for at least a quarter. While he was managing empires, she was managing her exit. And he, the man who saw everything, had seen nothing at all. He finally made the call to Marcus. "She's gone," Elias said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "Anya, she left." There was a carefully calibrated pause on the other end of the line. "Well," Marcus said, his voice smooth as polished stone, "that is inconvenient, but perhaps for the best. We can find someone more formally qualified. I can have a list from the top 3 global security firms on your desk by morning." Elias heard the words, the seamless efficiency, the immediate pivot to a solution. It was exactly what he would have said himself yesterday. It was the language of his world. But tonight, it sounded like an epitaph. Formally qualified. He had dismissed Anya himself with similar logic just 2 nights ago at the annual Foundation Gala. A public gesture of moving on, of upgrading. He had arranged for a new, highly credentialed security and medical specialist from a Swiss firm to be flown in. He had told Anya, quietly, and with what he thought was professional courtesy, that her service was no longer required, that he was restructuring his personal support. He had done it in a room full of people, a soft, surgical dismissal. He hadn't seen the look on her face. He hadn't looked for it. He was too busy performing his role, the role of Elias Thorne, the man in control. Now he understood. She had not been dismissed. She had simply been released. The silence in the apartment was no longer just an absence of sound. It was an answer. The gala had been a masterpiece of performative philanthropy. 200 of the world's most powerful people gathered in a restored museum under a canopy of shimmering glass, the city lights a glittering carpet below. Elias moved through the room, not like a guest, but like a conductor. He didn't mingle. He calibrated. A quiet word here with a cabinet minister. A shared glance there with a hedge fund titan. A firm handshake with an oil baron that communicated an entire paragraph of understanding. He wore a custom-tailored suit that felt like armor, his face a mask of urbane calm. This was his theater, and he was its lead actor. His body, however, was quietly betraying him. A low thrum of inflammation was building in his joints, a familiar fire that only one person in the world knew how to manage. Anya was not there. He had instructed her to remain at the residence. It was part of the transition. He was weaning himself off his dependency on her, or so he told himself. He was professionalizing his life. Marcus had been instrumental in this reframing. "Elias," he had said weeks ago, in his office that overlooked the park, "your operational security is world-class, but your personal support is anecdotal. This woman, this nurse, she's a legacy system. You need an enterprise solution, someone with corporate liability, a team behind them. It's about mitigating risk." It had made perfect sense. It was the language of his world. Risk, mitigation, enterprise solutions. He had failed to recognize that Anya was not a system. She was a sovereign entity. He found the man he was looking for near the edge of the terrace, a man named Renaud, a senior partner from the Swiss firm that was providing Anya's replacement. Renaud was impeccably dressed, his smile precise. "Elias," he said, extending a hand, "a pleasure. We are honored by the trust you're placing in us. Mademoiselle Dubois is the best. ex-military intelligence, advanced paramedic training. You will be in excellent hands. Elias nodded, the practiced gesture of a man accepting a report. I expect nothing less. Beside Renaud stood two of his junior associates, younger men with hungry eyes. One of them smirked, a flash of casual cruelty. We heard you are finally upgrading from the local talent, he said, his voice low but carrying. Good choice. Better to have a professional than a glorified babysitter. Elias did not react. He did not defend Anya. To do so would be to admit her importance, to reveal a vulnerability. He simply gave the man a cold, flat look that made him flinch and turn away. But the words hung in the air. Glorified babysitter. Local talent. It was how they saw her. It was, he was forced to admit, a version of how he had allowed himself to see her. A convenience. A comfort. Not a peer. Not a partner. Later in the evening, as he was making his way toward the exit, he passed a small group of doctors from a local research hospital his foundation supported. They were discussing a complex immunological case. One of them, a man named Dr. Al-Jamil, a researcher Anya admired and had spoken of, caught his eye. The doctor excused himself from his group and approached Elias. Mr. Thorne, he said, his expression unreadable. I heard you're replacing Nurse Sharma. Elias inclined his head, a gesture of confirmation without words. He was tired. The inflammation was making the bones in his hands ache. He wanted to be home. He wanted the tea she would have prepared, the specific blend of herbs that calmed the fire. Anya Sharma is one of the most brilliant clinical minds I have ever encountered, Dr. Al-Jamil said, his voice quiet but intense. She sees patterns no one else does. She consulted on a pediatric case for us last year, pro bono. Saved a child's life because she noticed an anomalous response to a standard anti-inflammatory, something every specialist on the team had missed. Elias stood very still. Anya had never mentioned this. She is a remarkable woman, the doctor continued, a note of disappointment entering his voice. I hope her new position, wherever it may be, affords her the respect she deserves. He paused, looking at Elias not with anger, but with a kind of clinical pity. It was a privilege to work with her. She was the only one paying attention. And there it was, the 7 words that would later become the refrain of his reckoning. At the time, they were just a strange, discordant note at the end of a long evening. He had dismissed them as professional sentimentality. He had gotten into his car, the city lights blurring past, and thought only of the logistics of the coming week. He did not think of the woman who had spent 7 years paying attention to every detail of his existence, from the subtle shifts in his blood chemistry to the geopolitical tensions in the South China Sea. He did not understand that her attention was the invisible scaffolding holding his entire world upright. He did not understand that by dismissing her, he had just sawed through the foundations of his own house. The foundation is not the house. He had spent his life decorating the rooms and never once thought to check the concrete. The silence of the residence was unlike any silence Elias had ever known. It was not the peaceful quiet of a country estate or the muffled hush of a soundproofed office. It was an active architectural silence, a silence built from removal. He walked through the rooms as if he were a visitor in his own life. Everything was in its place, yet everything was wrong. The books on the shelves were perfectly aligned, but they were just objects. Without her, they had lost their context. She was the one who would leave a specific volume open on his desk, a subtle prompt related to a problem he was wrestling with. A history of the Ottoman Empire when he was dealing with Turkish diplomats. A book of poetry by Czeslaw Milosz when he was navigating a particularly soul-crushing negotiation. He had thought it was a charming quirk. He saw now It was part of her method, a way of communicating, of supporting, that existed outside of spreadsheets and reports. He went to his closet. His suits were arranged by color and weight, a perfect system. But the small cedar blocks she used to keep the moths away were gone. The specific cufflink box he needed for his meeting the next day was not in its usual spot. It was a minor disruption, but it was a message. Her systems were gone. He was on his own. In the bathroom, the medical supplies were gone. Not just the emergency equipment, but the small things. The specific bandages he preferred, the saline solution she used to clean a cut, the small, unlabeled jar of a balm she made herself from calendula and comfrey for the inflammation in his hands. He looked at his hands now, the knuckles swollen and red. He had no idea how to make that balm. He had no idea where to even begin. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt since he was a child. Helplessness. He quickly suppressed it. He was Elias Thorne. He did not do helplessness. He went back to the kitchen island and stared at the folio she had left. It was bound in simple, dark blue leather. He opened it again. Inside, the first page was a master list of all household accounts, from the power company to the subscription for the Financial Times. Each account number was listed, along with the current password. The next section detailed the building's maintenance schedules, the contact for the head of security, the protocol for a fire alarm. It was flawlessly organized. And then he saw it. At the bottom of the final page, beneath the neatly printed name of the building supervisor, was a single line of handwritten text. It was not in her usual elegant script. It was a simple, block-printed address. An address in a part of the city he barely knew existed. A quiet, older neighborhood of low-rise buildings and small independent shops. There was no explanation, just the address. It was the first crack in her perfect, impersonal wall of silence. It was a breadcrumb. But a breadcrumb to where? And for what purpose? Was it a trap? A test? He ran the address through his internal security database on his encrypted laptop. It came back with a single hit, a small, family-owned pharmacy. Apotheke Metaxas. Established 1958. No corporate affiliations, no red flags. Just a small business that had been there for over 60 years. Why would she leave him the address of a pharmacy? His mind, trained to see patterns in chaos, began to work. She had managed his health for 7 years. His condition was a secret known to only 3 people: himself, her, and the specialist in Geneva who designed his treatment protocol. Anya was the one who sourced the specific, often custom-compounded medications he required. She did not use the large corporate pharmacies. She had always said they were too easy to track, their data too vulnerable. She used a network of small, independent apothecaries. This must be one of them. He felt a surge of something that resembled hope, a lead, a place to start. He closed the folio. The apartment was a sterile museum of a life that was no longer his. He could not stay here. He picked up his secure phone, the one that had delivered so much bad news just an hour before, and called his driver. The car, 10 minutes. He did not know what he would find at the pharmacy, but for the first time since he had walked through the door, he had a destination. He was no longer just standing in the wreckage. He was moving toward something. As he waited for the elevator, he glanced back at the empty apartment, the quiet rooms, the still air. It was a perfect representation of his world without her, polished, expensive, and utterly devoid of life. He finally understood that Anya had not just managed his home. She had been its heart, and it had taken her departure for him to even notice it had one. The calls had started just after midnight, a cascade of controlled demolition. First, Chen from Singapore, then Keller from Zurich, then Park from Seoul. By 3 a.m., Elias had lost the backing of 4 key partners in 3 different continents. The financial damage was already in the 9-figure range, but the reputational cost was immeasurable. These were not business associates. They were pillars of his network, men bound to him by years of mutual profit and shared secrets. Their synchronized withdrawal was not a coincidence. It was a coordinated attack. After the 4th call, he had sat in the silent apartment and forced himself to think. He was a strategist. This was a strategic problem. He pulled up the profiles of the 4 men: Chen, Keller, Park, and a 4th, a reclusive industrialist in Mumbai named Agarwal. What did they have in common? They were all deeply conservative, risk-averse, and obsessed with stability. Their loss of confidence was not emotional. It was a calculated response to a perceived threat. The threat, he was beginning to realize, was not something he had done, but something he had lost. Each of these men had a secret vulnerability that Elias had helped them manage. Chen's was a wayward son with a gambling problem. Keller's was a hidden portfolio of politically toxic assets. Park's was a rival's attempt at a corporate espionage attack. Agarwal's was a complex health issue for his daughter. And in every single case, the person who had managed the fine details of the solution, the person who had communicated with the son's handlers, who had traced the toxic assets, who had identified the source of the espionage, who had liaised with the medical specialists for Agarwal's daughter, was Anya Sharma. She had been his quiet, invisible operator. He had taken the credit for the grand strategy, but she had been the one on the ground, ensuring flawless execution. He had seen her as an administrator. These men, he now suspected, had seen her as the guarantor of his promises. Her departure was not a personal matter for them. It was a material change in their security arrangement with him. He had just become a riskier asset. He was halfway through this chilling analysis when his private line, the one reserved for his inner circle, buzzed. It was Marcus Vance. "Any more fallout?" Marcus asked, his voice a low murmur of concern. "2 more calls since we spoke," Elias said, his voice flat. He decided not to name them. A new instinct, sharp and unfamiliar, told him to withhold information. "This is bad, Elias. It's a run on your credibility. Someone is spooking our partners." "Who?" Elias asked, the question a sharp piece of ice. "I don't know, but I have my team digging. My gut says it's Volkov. He's been quiet too long. This has the feel of a Russian play. Undermine the network, create chaos, then move in." It was a plausible theory. Ivan Volkov was a rival, a man who operated in the shadows with a brutish, zero-sum mentality. It was exactly the kind of move he would make. But the new instinct in Elias's gut was screaming that this was too neat, too easy. "Keep digging," Elias said. "I need to handle something on my end." "What is it? I can send a team." "No," Elias said, more forcefully than he intended. "This is something I have to do myself." He ended the call. Marcus's offer of help felt less like support and more like an attempt to insert himself into the situation, to control the flow of information. He looked back at his screen, at the 4 profiles: Chen, Keller, Park, Agarwal. Anya had been the point of contact. She had built a relationship with them, or at least with their problems. She had been the face of his competence. And now she was gone. The 5th and final call of the night came at dawn, as the first gray light began to filter into the city. It was not from a partner. It was from Dr. Al-Jamil, the researcher from the gala. "Mr. Thorne," the doctor said, his voice urgent, "I apologize for the hour. I've been trying to reach Anya. There's an emergency with the pediatric case she consulted on. The child is having a reaction. We need her notes, her observations. The team is flying blind here. Elias felt a cold pit open in his stomach. I don't have them, he said. She's no longer with me. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean, no longer with you? She was monitoring this child's progress weekly. She has a dedicated encrypted channel with the parents. They can't reach her. I don't know where she is, Elias admitted, the words tasting like ash. The doctor's voice turned hard. Mr. Thorne, you don't understand. Anya wasn't just consulting. She personally guaranteed the funding for this child's experimental treatment. She set up a private trust. She told the family that if anything ever happened to her, they were to contact you, that you would honor the arrangement. Elias felt the floor drop out from under him. He had no knowledge of this. No knowledge of a trust, of a guarantee. He had built a billion-dollar foundation to handle his philanthropic gestures, all of them public, all of them vetted by committees. This was something else. This was quiet, direct, and personal. The trust, the doctor pressed, is administered by a law firm, but the treatment protocols, the observational data, that was all with Anya. Without it, we risk losing this child. Elias's mind was racing. This was not about his deals or his reputation anymore. This was about a child's life, and it was a liability she had deliberately and explicitly tied to him. It was not an act of malice. It was a test, a demand. Are you the man you claim to be? I will find her, Elias said, his voice now clear and steady. The dread had been burned away by a sudden, absolute clarity of purpose. I will find her notes. Give me 12 hours. He hung up the phone and stood up. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the expensive, empty rooms. The cascade of withdrawals had been a warning. This, the call about the child, was the real message. She had left him a trail, and at the end of it was not just an explanation, but a responsibility. A responsibility he had never known he had. He was no longer chasing a ghost. He was answering a summons. The morning light did little to warm the sterile apartment. It only served to illuminate the extent of her erasure. Elias, now operating with a cold, methodical focus, began a systematic search. He was not looking for a hidden letter or a diary. Anya did not deal in sentiment. He was looking for evidence, for the logic of her departure. He started in her bedroom. It was as impersonal as a hotel room that had just been cleaned. The bed was made with military precision. The closet was empty, save for a few wire hangers. The scent of her, a faint mix of lavender and something clean like cotton, was gone. He ran a hand along the smooth, polished surface of her dresser. He had bought it for her 2 years ago from a Danish designer. He had thought of it as a generous gift. He saw now that it was just a piece of furniture in a room she had never truly inhabited. She had slept here, but she had not lived here. This was a workspace, a temporary posting. Her life was elsewhere. He moved to the small office she had used. The computer was gone. The shredder bin was full. The bookshelves, which had once held volumes on pharmacology, logistics, and network theory, were bare. He ran his fingers along the empty shelves, feeling the faint layer of dust she would never have allowed to settle. She had been clearing out for weeks, right under his nose. He had been so consumed with his own world, his own importance, that he had failed to notice the slow, systematic dismantling of his own support structure. It was the ultimate intelligence failure, and it was entirely his own. In the bottom drawer of her desk, a drawer he had never opened, he found a single object. It was a small, leather-bound notebook. His heart beat faster. A journal? A confession? He opened it. It was filled with her neat, precise script, but it was not a diary. It was a logbook, a record of every flight he had ever taken, every medication he had ever ingested, every significant meeting and its outcome. It was a 7-year history of his life, recorded with the dispassionate accuracy of a scientist. And as he flipped through the pages, he saw a second set of entries, written in a different colored ink. These were notes about her own activities, the ones she had conducted in the shadows. Contacted C's son in Macau, arranged payment of debts. Traced K's asset leak to a junior analyst in their Geneva office, neutralized. Liaised with Dr. Al-Jamil, re-pediatric case. Increased funding to cover Phase 2 trials. He sank into her chair, the notebook open in his lap. It was all there, a complete hidden record of her work. The work he had taken for granted, the work he had taken credit for. She had not been his nurse. She had been his chief operating officer, his head of intelligence, and his moral compass, all rolled into one. And he had paid her a salary and called her a legacy system. The shame was a physical thing, a cold weight in his chest. He turned to the last page. The entry stopped 3 months ago, the date on the handover document. The final entry was not about him, it was about Marcus. MV proposed enterprise solution for personal support, framed as risk mitigation. True motive? To insert his own operative and gain access to private residence network, initiating counter protocol. Elias read the words again and again. The air left his lungs. Marcus, his most trusted advisor, his right hand, the man who had been so helpful, so concerned on the phone just hours ago. He had orchestrated this. He had engineered Anya's dismissal, not to protect Elias, but to expose him, to isolate him. The synchronized withdrawal of his partners, the chaos, the Russian play theory, it was all a fabrication, a smokescreen designed by Marcus. And Anya had seen it, 3 months ago. She hadn't left because he had dismissed her. She had left because she knew an attack was coming, and his blindness made him a liability. Her departure was not an act of retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal. She was getting off the X before the ambush. He stood up, the notebook feeling heavy as lead in his hand. He walked back to the kitchen island, where the folio still lay. He looked again at the single, handwritten address, the pharmacy. It was not just a breadcrumb. It was the start of the counter protocol. She had left him a path to follow, a way to uncover the truth, a way to fight back. But she was not leading him back to her. She was leading him toward an understanding of his own failure, his own catastrophic blindness. The morning was no longer about finding a missing person. It was about a man racing to catch up to a truth that had been waiting for him for months. He had to get to that pharmacy. He had to begin. They had met in a sterile, white room in a private hospital in Geneva 7 years ago. Elias was not a patient. He was a liability. He had collapsed during a critical negotiation, his body finally succumbing to the stress and the then undiagnosed autoimmune disease that had been plaguing him for years. His official story was exhaustion. The reality was a complete systemic breakdown. A team of the world's most expensive specialists surrounded his bed, arguing in 3 different languages about experimental treatments and aggressive interventions. They treated him like a fascinating, high-stakes puzzle. None of them were listening to his body. They were listening to the readouts on their machines. Anya Sharma was a junior agency nurse on the night shift, brought in to monitor his vitals. She was not supposed to have an opinion. She was supposed to be invisible. Elias remembered floating in a haze of pain and medication, the doctor's voices a meaningless drone. And then, a quiet presence, a cool hand on his forehead, a voice that did not command or diagnose but simply asked, "Does the light bother you?" He managed a nod. The overhead lights were dimmed. The noise from the hallway, Is it disturbing your rest? He nodded again. She closed the door. Small things, insignificant things, but they were the first acts of genuine care he had experienced in days. Later that night, his fever spiked. The alarms on his monitors blared. The senior physician was called, an arrogant man who immediately ordered a massive dose of steroids. As the attending nurse prepared the injection, Anya stepped forward. "Doctor," she said, her voice calm but firm. "His renal output has been decreasing for the past 6 hours. A high dose of steroids could push him into acute kidney failure." The doctor turned, his face a mask of fury. "Who are you?" "I'm the nurse on duty," she said, unintimidated. "And I've been logging his metrics manually every 15 minutes. The automated system only logs every hour. It missed the trend. He's not processing fluids correctly. The inflammation is pressing on his kidneys." She held up a clipboard with a hand-drawn chart, a meticulous graph of his decline. The doctor snatched it from her, his eyes scanning the data. His arrogance faltered, replaced by a grudging respect. "She's right," he muttered to his resident. "Hold the steroids. Let's start him on a renal support drip and see if we can bring the pressure down." They changed the treatment. The fever broke. The next morning, Elias felt the fog begin to lift for the first time in a week. He was weak, but he was lucid. Anya was there, checking the drip, her expression focused, professional. "You," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "You stopped them." She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. There was no pride in them, no expectation of thanks. There was only a quiet, steady competence. "The data indicated a different course of action," she said simply. "I presented the data." He had seen more than enough of the world to recognize a rare talent when it was standing right in front of him. He had seen generals who could command armies but couldn't read a weather report. He had seen CEOs who could mesmerize a boardroom but couldn't manage their own families. This woman, this quiet nurse, had the one skill that mattered more than any other. She paid attention. Not just to the obvious, but to the subtle, the overlooked, the things that happened in the spaces between the official reports. When he was discharged a month later, he made her an offer. He asked her to leave the hospital, to leave the agency, and to come work for him directly. He offered her a salary that was 5 times what she was making. "I will manage your health," she had said, sitting across from him in a sterile meeting room. Her posture was erect, her hands folded on the table. "But my role must be clearly defined. I am a clinical professional, not a personal assistant." "Of course," he had said, eager to agree to any terms. "Your role will be to ensure my physical readiness, nothing more." It was the first lie in their relationship, though he did not know it at the time. Over the next 7 years, her role had expanded silently, organically, until it encompassed every aspect of his life. She became his scheduler, his travel coordinator, his security consultant, his research analyst, and his confidant. She did it all so seamlessly, so quietly, that he had never stopped to redefine the terms. He had just accepted her ever-expanding competence as a feature of his life, like the sunrise. He had never considered what it cost her. He never asked her about her own life, her family, her dreams. He knew she sent money back to her parents in another country. He knew she liked a specific type of tea. He knew she read history books in her spare time, but these were facts, data points. They were not the components of a person. He had hired a clinical professional and, through his own neglect and self-absorption, turned her into a ghost, the invisible engine of his world. He remembered asking her once, during a particularly grueling trip, if she ever took a vacation. She had looked at him with that same, steady, unreadable expression. "My work is here," she had said. He had taken it as a statement of loyalty, of dedication. He saw it now for what it was, a statement of fact. Her work was to manage him, and his life did not allow for vacations. He had not just hired her, he had consumed her. And now, sitting in the back of his car as it sped toward a forgotten neighborhood, he understood that the trail she had left for him was not just a path to uncovering Marcus's betrayal. It was a curriculum, a 7-year course in what it means to truly see another person. And the final exam had just begun. The car, a gleaming black sedan that was as out of place in this neighborhood as a spaceship, pulled up across the street from the address Anya had left. Apotheca Metaxas. It was a small, unassuming storefront, its green and white striped awning faded by the sun. The windows were filled with old-fashioned apothecary jars and displays of herbal remedies. It looked like a relic from another century. Elias told his driver to wait. He got out of the car, the cool morning air a sharp contrast to the climate-controlled perfection of his vehicle. He felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him. People on their way to work, shopkeepers sweeping the pavement in front of their stores. They looked at his expensive suit, his polished shoes, and the waiting car, and they knew he did not belong here. For a man who moved invisibly through the corridors of power, he felt glaringly, uncomfortably conspicuous. He crossed the street and pushed open the door to the pharmacy. A small bell chimed. The air inside smelled of dried herbs, antiseptic, and old wood. The shelves were lined with bottles and boxes, some with modern labels, others with handwritten ones in elegant Greek script. Behind a high wooden counter stood an elderly man with a magnificent white mustache and kind, intelligent eyes. He wore a crisp white pharmacist's coat. "Good morning," the man said, his voice a gentle rumble. He did not seem surprised to see Elias. "May I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," Elias began, but the man held up a hand. "She is not here," he said simply, "but she left something for you." He reached under the counter and produced a small, padded envelope. It was sealed. Elias's name was written on it in Anya's neat, familiar hand. Elias took the envelope. It felt heavy. "Who are you?" Elias asked. "My name is Leonidas Metaxas," the old man said. "My family has owned this pharmacy for 3 generations. Anya was a good customer. More than a customer. A colleague." "A colleague?" "She understood the old ways," Mr. Metaxas said, gesturing to the jars behind him. "The balance of things. She knew that some remedies cannot be mass-produced. They require care, attention." He looked directly at Elias, and for a moment his kind eyes held a flicker of something sharp, something assessing. "She paid for everything in advance, you know, for a full year's supply of your compounds. She said you might be indisposed." The word hung in the air. Indisposed. It was a gentle way of saying he might be crippled by his own ignorance. "She also set up accounts for 3 other families in this neighborhood," the pharmacist continued, his voice dropping slightly. "People who had lost their jobs when a factory closed down. A factory owned by a holding company that your firm acquired last year. She made sure they had the medicine they needed, for their children, for their parents. She said it was a corporate responsibility you would want to honor." Elias felt that familiar, cold shame wash over him again. He remembered the acquisition. It had been a footnote in a much larger deal, a small manufacturing plant he had ordered shut down for efficiency. He had never once thought about the people who worked there. Anya had. "She also left a message for you," Mr. Metaxas said. He turned and picked up a small folded piece of paper from beside his mortar and pestle. "She said you would understand it." Elias unfolded the paper. It was not a message. It was a prescription slip. But instead of a medication, it had a library call number written on it, a Dewey Decimal number, and below it, the name of a specific university archive. "Thank you," Elias said, his voice hoarse. He turned to leave. "Mr. Thorne," the old pharmacist called after him. Elias stopped, his hand on the door. "Attention is a finite resource," Mr. Metaxas said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a lifetime of observation. "Where you choose to place it defines you. She placed hers well." Elias did not reply. He walked out of the pharmacy, the bell chiming behind him, and got back into the car. He held the sealed envelope in his hand. He knew, without opening it, that it would contain a hard drive or a memory stick. The evidence. The start of Anya's counter-protocol against Marcus. The prescription slip was the next step on the trail. The trail that was not just a set of directions, but a moral education. He had outsourced his conscience, and now he was being forced to retrace its steps, to see the quiet, vital work it had been doing in the margins of his world. He gave his driver the address of the university. As the car pulled away, he looked back at the small pharmacy. Mr. Metaxas was standing in the doorway, watching him go. He was the first of them, Elias realized. The first custodian of Anya's truth. A quiet, decent man in a quiet neighborhood, holding a piece of a puzzle that stretched across the globe. Elias finally opened the envelope. Inside, as he had suspected, was a single military-grade encrypted hard drive and a small note. It contained only 2 words: "Be careful." The university archive was housed in a brutalist concrete building that stood in stark contrast to the manicured green lawns of the campus. It was a fortress of knowledge, a place where history was stored, cataloged, and, for the most part, forgotten. Elias, having changed into a less conspicuous dark sweater and trousers, walked through the heavy glass doors and into the hushed, climate-controlled silence of the main reading room. The air smelled of old paper and preservation chemicals. He approached the main desk, where a woman with sharp eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun looked up at him over her spectacles. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted it. "I have a call number," Elias said, handing her the prescription slip. She took it, her eyes scanning the number. Her expression did not change, but he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She was another one, another custodian. "This is from a restricted collection," she said, her voice flat. "Access requires special authorization." "My name is Elias Thorne," he said. "I believe the authorization has been arranged." She typed his name into her computer. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "It seems it has. One moment." She disappeared into the stacks, her footsteps silent on the cork floor. Elias waited, his hands in his pockets. He felt the familiar impatience, the desire to take control, to speed things up. He forced himself to stand still, to observe. The room was filled with a handful of graduate students, lost in their research. They were paying attention, their focus absolute. He was the only one in the room whose mind was scattered, racing ahead. The archivist returned, carrying a single, gray, acid-free box. She placed it on the counter with a soft thud. "You may use Corel 7, she said, pointing to a small, private study room. "The materials may not leave this building. You have 4 hours." Elias took the box. "Who arranged this?" he asked. "The donor of the collection," the archivist replied, her face a perfect mask of professional discretion. "She is a private scholar, a meticulous researcher." Elias carried the box to Corel 7, a small, glass-walled room with a single table and chair. He sat down and opened the box. It was not filled with ancient manuscripts or rare books. It was filled with modern, corporate-looking binders, 12 of them, each neatly labeled with a date range, starting 7 years ago. He opened the first binder. It was full of documents related to his own life and work. But they were not his documents. They were documents about the collateral effects of his work. News clippings about protest outside a mine he had helped finance in South America. An environmental impact report, heavily redacted in the official version he had seen, but here, in its complete, damning entirety. A list of names. Farmers, activists, local journalists who had been displaced or silenced. In the margins, in Anya's neat script, were notes. Contacted AR, journalist, now in exile in Madrid, secured funding for her new project. Tracked down the children of the displaced farmers, enrolled them in a school in the capital. He went through binder after binder. It was the same story, over and over again. Every deal, every acquisition, every strategic move he had made had a shadow ledger, a human cost that he had never bothered to calculate. And Anya had been quietly, systematically working to mitigate that cost. She had been running a one-woman NGO, a shadow foundation, operating in the blind spots of his empire. She was not just cleaning up his messes. She was fulfilling the moral obligations he had ignored. He finally understood the nature of the trust Dr. Al-Jamil had spoken of. It wasn't just for one child. It was a whole network of support, a safety net she had woven with her own hands, funded by the generous salary he had paid her. He had thought he was buying her loyalty. She had used his money to buy back a piece of his soul. He sat back in the chair, the enormity of it washing over him. This was not just about Marcus's betrayal. This was about his own. He had betrayed the fundamental premise of his own work. He had told himself that his consolidation of power, his ruthless efficiency, served a greater good, creating stability in a chaotic world. But here, in this gray box, was the evidence that his stability was built on the instability of others. He had been a hypocrite, and Anya was the only one who had kept the receipts. He spent the next 3 hours going through the archive, the sick feeling in his stomach growing with every page he turned. He was not just reading a collection of documents. He was reading an indictment of his entire life. Finally, he reached the last binder. It was thinner than the others. It was labeled Project Chimera. Inside, there were no news clippings or environmental reports. There were only financial records, encrypted transaction logs, offshore account statements, and routing numbers. It was the evidence from the hard drive Mr. Metaxas had given him, printed out and meticulously organized. It was a map of a crime, and at the center of the map was Marcus Vance. Tucked into a pocket at the back of the binder was another sealed envelope. Elias opened it. Inside was not a hard drive or a note. It was a ferry ticket, a one-way ticket to a small, remote island off the coast, dated for the next morning, and a small, folded piece of paper. On it were 3 words. The foundation is not the house. His own aphorism turned back on him. She was showing him the foundation he had built, the one made of concrete and rebar, and the one he had ignored, the one made of people and principles. He closed the box. The archivist was waiting for him at the desk. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked, her expression unchanged. "I found what I needed to see," he said. As he walked out of the archive and back into the sunlight, he felt like a man who had just walked out of his own tomb. He had spent the morning discovering the truth of his past. Now he had to face its future. He had a ferry to catch. Elias spent the night not in a luxury hotel, but in a small, anonymous room he kept for emergencies, a place that wasn't connected to his name in any database. With him was Julian, his loyal operator, the only person left in his organization he could trust without reservation. Julian was a former intelligence analyst, a quiet, methodical man whose loyalty was to Elias personally, not to the corporate structure. He worked in the shadows, a ghost who cleaned up problems Elias couldn't touch directly. While Elias had been at the archive, Julian had been working on the hard drive from the pharmacy. Now, in the sparse, functional room, the results of that work were projected onto the bare white wall. "It's a shadow ledger," Julian said, his voice a low monotone. He pointed to a complex diagram of financial flows. For the past 18 months, someone has been mirroring your sensitive transactions. For every deal you made, they made a corresponding microtransaction through a series of shell corporations. It's designed to look like background noise, rounding errors. But when you aggregate it, it's a perfect map of your entire financial network. "Marcus," Elias said. It wasn't a question. "It all routes back to a master account in a jurisdiction that doesn't cooperate with international banking regulations," Julian confirmed. "The account was opened 19 months ago. The beneficial owner is a holding company. The director of that company is Marcus Vance." The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The proposal to upgrade Anya, the subtle poisoning of his relationships with his partners, the Russian play theory. It was all part of a long, patient, and devastatingly effective campaign to isolate and ruin him. Marcus wasn't just a traitor. He was a usurper. "There's more," Julian said, his expression grim. He brought up a new set of files, encrypted audio recordings. Anya was thorough. She must have suspected him long before she had the financial proof. She put a deep-level bug on his private network. Not in his office or his home, in the network infrastructure itself. It's brilliant, untraceable. He played the first recording. It was Marcus's voice, smooth and confident. He was speaking to an unknown party. "The target's dependency on the asset is total. By removing the asset, we create a systemic vulnerability. He'll be operating blind. The network will panic. The collapse will be swift. We then step in to stabilize the situation." The target was Elias. The asset was Anya. "He's not just trying to take your money," Julian said quietly. "He's trying to take your entire life. He's planning to frame you for the collapse and present himself as the savior." Elias felt a surge of cold fury, but it was quickly tempered by a deeper, more profound realization. Anya had known this. She had seen it coming. She had gathered the evidence, built the case, and laid it out for him to find. She wasn't just saving herself. She was giving him the tools to save himself. But she was making him do the work. She was forcing him to walk the path, to see the consequences, to understand the full scope of his own blindness before he could even begin to fight back. "The partners," Elias said, thinking aloud. "Chen, Keller, Park. Marcus must have contacted them. He must have shown them something." "Or told them something," Julian corrected. "He could have told them Anya had quit, that your operational security was compromised. For men like that, the perception of instability is the same as instability itself. He didn't need to lie. He just needed to report the truth of her absence, a truth he engineered." It was a masterful move, using the truth as a weapon. Elias looked at the ferry ticket sitting on the small table. The next stop on his education, the final piece of the puzzle before he could confront the architect of it all. "What do you need from me?" Julian asked. "Locate Marcus," Elias said. "I want to know where he is, who he's talking to, but do not engage. Do not let him know we're on to him. He thinks I'm still reeling, confused. Let him think that. Let him get comfortable." "And you?" "I have an appointment to keep," Elias said, picking up the ticket. He was beginning to understand the logic of Anya's trail. The pharmacy had shown him her quiet compassion. The archive had shown him her hidden conscience. What would the island show him? He had a feeling it would be the most difficult lesson of all. He looked at the evidence projected on the wall, the cold, hard proof of his friend's betrayal. A year ago, this discovery would have sent him into a rage. He would have unleashed hell on Marcus, a swift and brutal retaliation. But the lessons of the last 24 hours had changed him. The shame of his own failure was a powerful sedative. His anger was still there, a cold, dense star in his chest. But it was no longer in control. It was just another data point. He had to think like Anya, calmly, methodically, with a focus not on revenge, but on restoration. He had to protect the people she had protected. He had to honor the commitment she had made in his name. He had to become the man she had believed he could be, the man he had promised to be in that hospital room 7 years ago. The foundation is not the house. Marcus had tried to demolish his house, but Anya had known the foundation was deeper, and she had just handed Elias the blueprints. The ferry was a small, functional vessel, smelling of salt and diesel. It was filled with a handful of island residents returning with supplies from the mainland, their faces weathered by the sun and wind. Elias, in his simple, dark clothes, blended in for the first time in a long while. He stood at the stern, watching the city skyline recede until it was just a smudge on the horizon. The sea was choppy, the sky a vast, indifferent gray. It felt like a journey to the end of the world. The island, when it came into view, was a rugged strip of green and granite, ringed by a few rocky beaches. There was a small harbor with a dozen fishing boats, a single pub, a general store, and a scattering of houses. It was a place where time seemed to move at a different pace. As he disembarked, a man in a heavy wool sweater and a worn cap approached him. He was tall and lean, with the quiet watchfulness of someone who spent their life reading the water. "Mr. Thorne?" the man asked. His voice was a low burr, an island accent. "I'm Angus. She said you might be coming." She was the only name Anya needed here. Angus was the boat captain, the third custodian. "Where is she?" Elias asked. "She's not here," Angus said, the familiar refrain. "She left 2 days ago, but she asked me to show you something first." He led Elias away from the small village up a winding coastal path. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of salt and wild herbs. Below them, the gray sea crashed against the rocks. "She came here a lot," Angus said as they walked. "First time was about 4 years ago. She chartered my boat, said she wanted to see the puffins." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "We both knew there were no puffins that time of year. She was looking for something else." "What was she looking for?" "People," Angus said. She had a list of names. Families that used to work for a fish processing plant on the mainland. The one that got bought out and shut down by some big corporation. Elias stopped. He remembered that deal too. Another efficiency measure. Another set of lives he had disrupted without a second thought. "She found them," Angus continued. "Most of them had come back here, to the island where they were born. No work, no prospects. She didn't just give them money. That's the easy part. She gave them a purpose." He pointed to a series of small, modern-looking buildings nestled in a sheltered cove below them. They looked like workshops. "She bought them new boats. Not big trawlers, but smaller, sustainable creels for catching crab and lobster. She set up a cooperative. She found them a market on the mainland, a chain of high-end restaurants that wanted fresh, sustainably caught seafood. She didn't give them a handout. She gave them a business." They walked down to the cove. A few men were mending nets, their hands moving with practiced skill. They looked up as Elias and Angus approached. They nodded to Angus, and then their eyes fell on Elias. There was no hostility in their gaze, but there was a deep, searching curiosity. They knew who he was. Anya must have told them. He was the man whose actions had almost destroyed their lives. And he was the man whose money, wielded by Anya, had given them a new one. "She paid attention to the currents," Angus said, his eyes on the water. "Not just the tides. the economic currents, the human currents. She knew that when a big ship changes course, it leaves a wake, and in that wake, small boats can get swamped. She spent her time helping the small boats. He turned to Elias, his gaze direct and unflinching. She said you were the captain of a very big ship. The metaphor was simple, direct, and devastating. Elias had been so focused on his destination that he had never once looked back at the wake he was leaving behind. Angus led him to a small, clean office at the edge of the cove. Inside, a laptop sat on a simple wooden desk. "She left this for you," Angus said. "It's the final piece." He handed Elias a slip of paper with a password written on it. "I'll leave you to it." Angus closed the door, leaving Elias alone in the quiet room. He sat down at the desk and turned on the laptop. He entered the password. A single file opened. It was a video call recording. The date was from the previous day. Anya's face appeared on the screen. She looked rested. The faint lines of tension that had always been around her eyes were gone. She was wearing a simple blue sweater, and her hair was down. She looked younger, more at peace than he had ever seen her. She was not talking to him. She was talking to Marcus. Marcus was in his office, his face a mask of smug concern. "Anya," he was saying, "I was so sorry to hear you'd left. Elias is not taking it well. He's spiraling. The partners are abandoning him. It's a mess." "Is it, Marcus?" Anya's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Or is it all going according to your plan?" Marcus's smile faltered. "I don't know what you mean." "I know about the shadow ledger, Marcus," she said, her voice still quiet, but now with a core of steel. "I know about the shell companies. I know about your plan to seize control. I have everything." The color drained from Marcus's face. The mask of the concerned friend dissolved, replaced by a look of pure, venomous hatred. "You," he spat. "You were always a problem, a sentimental, unprofessional liability." "No, Marcus," Anya said. "I was the only one paying attention." She paused, letting the words land. "This is not a threat. It's a statement of fact. You have two options. You can dismantle your entire operation, return the funds, and resign quietly. Or, I will release this evidence to every regulatory body, every law enforcement agency, and every one of Elias's partners. The choice is yours." The video ended. Elias sat there, the sound of the sea outside the window filling the silence. She had confronted him. She had given him a way out. And Elias knew Marcus well enough to know he would never take it. He would double down. He would try to destroy her and Elias before they could destroy him. And then, a new file on the desktop blinked. It was a live document. A single sentence appeared, typed in real time from wherever Anya was now. "He didn't take the deal. He's calling an emergency board meeting to have you removed. You have 6 hours. The location of the clinic is now unlocked on your phone. Come alone. We have work to do." Elias looked at his phone. A new pin had appeared on the map. A small, rural clinic 200 kilometers up the coast. The final destination. He closed the laptop. The education was over. The test was about to begin. He walked out of the office and found Angus waiting for him, staring out at the sea. "You have what you need?" Angus asked. "Yes," Elias said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," the boat captain said. "She's the one you need to thank." He paused, then added, "She's a good woman. Don't make the same mistake twice." Elias met his gaze. "I don't intend to." He began the walk back to the harbor, his mind clear, his purpose absolute. He was no longer the captain of a big ship charting a course across the globe. He was just a man, walking up a hill, trying to earn a second chance. The 10 black SUVs arrived, not with a roar of engines, but with a quiet, synchronized precision that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. They fanned out around the small, whitewashed rural clinic, securing the perimeter with an unnerving, silent efficiency. The men who emerged were not thugs. They were quiet professionals in dark suits, their faces impassive, their movements economical. To the few locals who witnessed the arrival, a farmer on his tractor, a woman hanging her laundry, it was an inexplicable event, a scene from a movie unfolding in their quiet corner of the world. Inside the clinic, a young doctor named Maria was in the middle of a heated discussion with two older, more cynical colleagues in the staff room. They were talking about Anya, the quiet, skilled woman who had shown up a few days ago, a referral from a respected specialist in the city, offering to volunteer her time. "I'm telling you, there's something off about her," Dr. Renaud, a portly, world-weary GP, was saying. "She's too good. Her diagnostic skills are better than any specialist I've ever met, and she works for free? People like that don't exist." "He's right," chimed in Dr. LeBlanc, a surgeon whose cynicism was legendary. "She's probably running from something, a scandal, a lawsuit. No man would ever marry a woman that intense, that focused. She's all work, no life. It's not natural." Maria, who had been mentored by Anya for the past 2 days and felt her own skills sharpen under the quiet tutelage, was about to defend her when the clinic's receptionist burst into the room, her face pale. "You need to see this," she whispered. The 3 doctors followed her to the front window. They stared in stunned silence at the fleet of black vehicles, the silent men taking up positions. It looked like an invasion. "What is this?" LeBlanc breathed. "The police? The military?" And then a door on the lead vehicle opened. Elias Thorne stepped out. He was alone. He did not look at the security team. He didn't need to. His focus was entirely on the front door of the clinic. He walked toward it, his stride measured and confident. The men in the suits were his. The entire overwhelming display of force was for him. Or, they realized with a jolt, for her. "My God," Renaud whispered. "That's Elias Thorne. The Elias Thorne." He was a man they had only ever seen on the news, a shadowy figure who moved governments and markets. And he was here, at their tiny clinic. The 3 of them looked at each other, their earlier conversation, their petty judgments about Anya, now seeming absurd and pathetic. No man would ever marry her. The words echoed in LeBlanc's mind with a fresh, stinging irony. They had been looking at a queen and had only seen a pawn. Elias entered the clinic. The receptionist shrank back from the desk. He ignored her. His eyes scanned the hallway and found Maria, who was standing frozen in the doorway of the staff room. He walked directly to her. "I'm here to see Anya Sharma," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that left no room for argument. Maria could only nod. She led him down the hall to a small consultation room at the back of the clinic. Anya was inside, sitting at a small desk, reviewing a patient's chart. She looked up as he entered. She was exactly as she had been on the video call, calm, rested, in control. Maria quickly closed the door, leaving them alone. The room was small and spare, a desk, 2 chairs, an examination table. The only sound was the ticking of a clock on the wall. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Elias was the first to speak. "The SUVs were a mistake," he said. It was not an apology. It was a statement of fact, an admission of a tactical error. He was still thinking in his old language. "They were an old habit," Anya replied, her voice even. "A performance of power. You came all this way. What have you learned?" The question was direct, a teacher quizzing her student. "I learned," he said, his voice dropping, "that I was blind. That I built an empire on a foundation I never bothered to inspect. I learned that while I was managing my image, You were managing my reality and my responsibilities. He paused, the ticking of the clock suddenly loud in the silence. I saw the archive. I went to the island. I saw the call with Marcus. And what did you conclude? She asked. I concluded that your departure was not an abandonment, he said. It was an invitation to see, and a warning. Marcus is making his move, she said, her tone shifting, becoming more operational. The board meeting is in 5 hours and 40 minutes. He's using your instability and the withdrawal of the partners as leverage. He's going to propose a vote of no confidence and offer himself as the interim leader. I know, Elias said. Julian is monitoring him. He's in the London office, rallying support. He'll fail, Anya said with absolute certainty. Why? Because his entire strategy is based on a false premise. That I'm weak? No, she said. His premise is that your power comes from your network, your money, and your reputation. He's trying to take those things away from you, but he's wrong. What does my power come from then? Elias asked, the question genuine. He felt like he was learning the basics of his own life all over again. Anya looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something other than calm professionalism in her eyes. It was not warmth, not yet, but it was a flicker of the woman from the hospital room 7 years ago, the woman who saw things others missed. Your power, Elias, she said, comes from the fact that when you give your word, you keep it. The partners who left you did so because they believed that was no longer true. Marcus convinced them that by letting me go, you had broken your word, that your guarantee was no longer absolute. To defeat him, you don't need to fight him. You just need to prove him wrong. She gestured to the chair opposite her. Sit down. We have calls to make. You are going to speak to every member of that board. You are not going to command them. You are not going to threaten them. You are going to do something you haven't done in a very long time. You are going to explain. And you are going to listen. He sat down. For the first time in 7 years, they were equals, partners in a crisis. The ticking clock on the wall was no longer just a measure of time. It was the rhythm of their new beginning. A race against time, not to save his empire, but to earn the right to rebuild it. The small consultation room became a war room. Anya slid a secure, satellite-enabled laptop across the desk. It was her own. This is a closed network, she said, untraceable. The board members' private numbers are preloaded. We'll start with Chen in Singapore. He's the bellwether. If he comes back, the others will follow. Elias looked at the screen. Chen's face, stern and uncompromising, was the first profile picture. His instinct, honed over decades, was to apply pressure, to remind Chen of the favors he was owed, to leverage their shared history. It was the way of his world. What do I say? He asked, and the question itself was a revolution. He, Elias Thorne, was asking for guidance. Anya's expression was unreadable. You tell him the truth, she said. You tell him you made a mistake. You tell him you were blind to an internal threat. You admit your vulnerability. And then you give him your word, but not just your word, guaranteed by mine. By yours? When you lost me, you lost their confidence, she explained, her logic as clean and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. They didn't trust you alone. They trusted the system, and I was the administrator of that system. My name is now the currency you have to use to buy back their trust. It was a bitter pill to swallow. His pride, the very core of his identity, recoiled from the idea of using her as a crutch. But he looked at her calm, steady face and saw the undeniable truth in her eyes. His pride was the reason they were in this mess. It was a luxury he could no longer afford. He took a breath and initiated the call. Chen answered on the first ring, his face appearing on the screen. He looked tired and grim. "Elias?" he said, his voice flat. There was no greeting. "Chen?" Elias began, his voice steady. "I'm calling to tell you that you were right to withdraw your support. My judgment was compromised. I was blind to a threat inside my own organization." Chen's expression flickered with surprise. He had expected bluster, threats, denial. He had not expected an admission of failure. "I have failed to properly value my most important asset," Elias continued, his eyes meeting Chen's on the screen. He did not look at Anya, but he felt her presence, a silent, powerful force in the room. "The person who guaranteed the flawless execution of my commitments to you. Her name is Anya Sharma. I am with her now. We have uncovered a plot by Marcus Vance to destabilize my network and seize control. He manipulated you. He used her departure, which he engineered, to create a crisis of confidence." Elias paused, letting the information sink in. "I am asking you not to trust me. Not yet. I am asking you to trust her. She is my partner in this. She holds the evidence of Vance's betrayal. We are moving to contain him. I need your support in the board meeting. I need your vote." He finished. The silence stretched. Anya sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the desk. Chen stared at the screen, his mind clearly working, reassessing. "Put her on," he said finally. Elias slid the laptop over to Anya. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice clear and professional. "It is good to speak with you again. I hope your son is well." The personal touch, the demonstration of her attention. Chen's stern facade softened almost imperceptibly. "He is, Anya. Thank you. Thanks to the arrangements you made." "The arrangements will continue, uninterrupted," she said. "Elias and I will see to it personally. We are restructuring. This vulnerability will be eliminated. We can forward you the preliminary evidence against Marcus within the hour. All we ask is that you abstain from the vote of no confidence, that you give us time to restore order." Chen was silent for a full 10 seconds. "You have it," he said at last. "You have my trust, Anya. I will abstain." The call ended. Elias felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled him. It had worked. Her strategy, her currency, had worked. "One down," Anya said, her tone all business. "Now Keller in Zurich. He's a different personality, less about family, more about process. With him, you will lead with the data, the financial evidence of Marcus's fraud." And so it went. For the next 3 hours, they worked their way through the list. Elias, guided by Anya's incisive, almost telepathic understanding of each board member's personality, tailored his approach. With the German industrialist, he was direct and logical. With the Italian aristocrat, he was more nuanced, speaking of loyalty and honor. With the American tech billionaire, he was blunt and focused on the bottom line. With each call, he felt a part of his old self dying and a new one being born. He was not commanding. He was communicating. He was not dictating. He was collaborating. And with every call, he invoked Anya's name, not as his subordinate, but as his partner. He was publicly declaring her value, her importance, correcting the record of his own neglect with every word. By the time they reached the last name on the list, they had secured the abstention or the outright support of a majority of the board. Marcus's coup was going to fail. As he finished the final call, Elias leaned back in his chair, exhausted but clear-headed. He looked at Anya, the architect of this victory. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, unadorned, but they carried the weight of his entire journey. "We're not finished yet," she said, her eyes on the ticking clock. "He will not take this loss gracefully. He will do something desperate, something lateral." As if on cue, a message flashed on the screen from Julian. "Vance is on the move. He's left the London office. He's not heading to the airport. He's heading to the sub-level data archive. He's going to try to wipe the servers, erase the evidence of his crimes, and probably a decade of the firm's legitimate records along with it. A corporate decapitation strike." "He's going to burn the house down," Elias said, the old phrase taking on a new, literal meaning. "How long until he gets there?" Anya asked, her focus absolute. "Julian's estimate is 20 minutes, Elias replied, "and a server wipe of that magnitude will take another 10. 30 minutes, Anya said. "We have 30 minutes to stop him." The race was not over. It had just entered its final, most dangerous lap. Marcus Vance was not a man who panicked. He was a creature of pure, cold logic. When his contacts on the board began calling him, one by one, to inform him they were withdrawing their support for his motion, he did not rage. He simply calculated. His plan had failed. His exposure was imminent. Flight was an option, but it was a messy, undignified one. There was another way, a cleaner, more absolute solution. If he could not take control of the institution, he would unmake it. The firm's central servers, housed in a secure subterranean facility in London, were its brain. They held every contract, every transaction, every secret. Wiping them would be an act of corporate nihilism, destroying billions in value and decades of history. But it would also erase every trace of his own crimes, plunging the entire network into a chaos so profound that his own specific betrayal would be lost in the noise. It was a scorched earth strategy, the act of a man with nothing left to lose. He used his executive credentials to access the facility, his face a calm mask as he passed through the security checkpoints. The technicians on duty saw only a senior partner on an unscheduled inspection. They had no reason to suspect he was there to pull the plug on their entire world. Back in the small clinic, the atmosphere was electric. The ticking clock was a hammer counting down to 0. "Julian can't stop him," Elias said, his mind racing through the possibilities. "The facility is locked down. By the time he gets the authorization to breach, it will be too late." "Then we can't stop him physically," Anya said. "We have to stop him operationally." She was already typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The servers have a remote failsafe, a kill switch that can be activated by 2 of 3 key holders simultaneously. You are one. The other 2 are the firm's chief technology officer, a woman named Chen Li, and the head of security, a man named Peters. They're loyal to the firm, not to me," Elias said. "They won't take my order." "They won't," Anya agreed. "But they will take an order from the board, or at least from the acting majority. Get them on a conference call, all of them, the ones who supported us." It was a brilliant, desperate gambit, using the very network he had just resecured to perform emergency surgery on itself. Elias's hands were a blur as he initiated the multi-party call. Faces began to pop up on the screen. Chen from Singapore, Keller from Zurich, the others from around the world. Their expressions were grim. "Marcus Vance is attempting to destroy the firm's central data archive," Elias said, dispensing with all pleasantries. "He is in the facility now. He will initiate a full wipe in approximately," he glanced at the clock, "22 minutes. We need to activate the remote failsafe. I need a majority of you to verbally instruct Chen Li and Peters to concur. Now." There was a moment of stunned silence, and then Chen's voice cut through. "Do it. This is a direct instruction from the board." One by one, the others echoed their assent. It was an unprecedented act, a group of the world's most powerful financiers and industrialists conducting a crisis meeting from their bedrooms and home offices, a virtual coup to save their own company. While Elias was managing the board, Anya was on a separate channel, locating the two key holders. She found Chen Li at her daughter's violin recital. She found Peters at a pub, halfway through a pint. She patched them into the main call. "Miss Chen, Mr. Peters," Elias said, his voice crackling with authority. "You have heard the instruction from the board. I am initiating my side of the failsafe now. I need your concurrence. Anya, what's the clock?" 19 minutes, she said, her voice calm. Chen Li, her face pale in the dim light of the auditorium, nodded. "I'm initiating." Peters, standing in the noisy pub, put a finger in his ear. "Understood. Activating my key now." In the subterranean facility in London, Marcus Vance was standing at the master console, his hand hovering over the button that would trigger the wipe. He was smiling, a thin, cold smile of a man who had found a kind of peace in utter destruction. A red light on the console began to flash. "Unauthorized remote access," a computerized voice announced. Then a second light. "Failsafe protocol initiated by keyholder Thorne." A third. "Failsafe protocol initiated by keyholder Chen." A fourth. "Failsafe protocol initiated by keyholder Peters." Marcus's smile vanished. The console in front of him went dark. A heavy magnetic lock slammed into place over the white controls. "System lockdown engaged," the voice announced. "All executive privileges suspended pending board review." He was locked out. He was trapped. He stared at the dead console, his face a canvas of disbelief. He had been outmaneuvered. He had calculated every angle except one, that Elias, the man he thought was broken and alone, could rally the entire network and move faster than him. He hadn't accounted for Anya. He turned from the console and saw two of the facility's internal security guards approaching him, their faces grim. He didn't run. He simply stood there, a king checkmated in the heart of his own crumbling fortress. Back in the clinic, a message from Julian flashed on the screen. "Vance is in custody. The archive is secure." Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He looked at Anya. The ticking clock on the wall was still there, but it no longer sounded like a bomb. It just sounded like a clock. They had done it. They had won. The board members on the screen were talking at once, relief and adrenaline pouring through the connection. Elias held up a hand. "Thank you," he said. "All of you. We will begin the process of damage control and restoration at 800 Greenwich Mean Time. I will be in London by then." He ended the call. The small room was quiet again. He looked at Anya, and 1,000 things he wanted to say crowded his mind, but none of them seemed adequate. "You said we had work to do," he said finally. "We did," she replied, closing the laptop. "And now it's done." But he knew, and he suspected she did too, that the real work, the work of rebuilding not just a company, but a relationship and a life, had only just begun. The aftermath was a flurry of controlled, precise activity. Elias, flying to London on a private jet, felt a strange sense of detachment. He had spent his entire career in the center of storms like this, managing the chaos, dictating the outcomes. This time, he felt like a passenger. The victory was not entirely his. It was shared. And that realization changed everything. He spent the next 48 hours in a series of sterile boardrooms, overseeing the institutional cleansing. Lawyers drafted separation agreements. Forensic accountants traced every penny Marcus had siphoned. Security teams scrubbed the network of any backdoors or sleeper programs he might have left behind. It was a massive, complex operation, but it felt easier than his work had ever felt before. he wasn't doing it alone. From the small clinic on the coast, Anya was his silent partner. She fed him information, reminded him of details he had forgotten, and offered quiet, strategic advice through their secure channel. She was the one who remembered the pension fund for the junior staff that Marcus had compromised. She was the one who flagged a small, seemingly insignificant subsidiary in Malaysia that he had used as a testbed for his financial manipulations. She saw the whole board, every piece, while he had only ever focused on the major players. His partners, the men who had almost abandoned him, now treated him with a new kind of respect. It was no longer the deference given to a powerful, feared figure. It was the respect afforded to a colleague. They had seen his vulnerability, his failure, and they had seen him recover not through brute force, but through honesty and collaboration. He was more reliable to them now, not less. Julian's final report on Marcus was delivered in a single sealed envelope. He had been located not in a prison, but in a quiet, comfortable house in the countryside, under a form of house arrest arranged by the board. His assets were frozen. His career was over. He was a ghost, erased from the world he had tried to conquer. The report contained a transcript of his final interview with the firm's lawyers. "I don't understand," Marcus had said, his voice devoid of its usual confidence. "I had him. He was broken." The lawyer's response was simple. "You miscalculated. You thought you were fighting one man. You were fighting two." Elias read the words and felt not triumph, but a profound sense of melancholy. Marcus had been his friend, his closest confidant for over a decade, and Elias had been so blind, so wrapped up in his own narrative that he had never truly seen the man beside him. His betrayal was not just Marcus's crime. It was Elias's failure. On the third day, Dr. Al-Jamil called him. "The new data Anya sent us was the key," he said, his voice filled with a relief that was almost palpable. "We've stabilized the child. She's responding to the new protocol. Anya, she's a miracle worker." "Yes," Elias said, the word catching in his throat. "She is." He hung up the phone and looked out the window of his London office at the gray, sprawling city. He had restored the institution. He had protected the innocent. He had honored the commitments Anya had made. He had passed the test. But he knew there was one final task to complete, a public correction. A statement not made in a private call or a secure message, but in the open, for the whole world to see. He called his communications director. "The keynote speech at the Davos summit next month," he said. "I'll be giving it myself, and I'll be writing it." He knew exactly what he was going to say. The World Economic Forum in Davos was the apex of his world, a gathering of the global elite in a pristine Swiss mountain town, a place where deals were made and futures were charted in hushed conversations on fur-lined terraces. It was the ultimate stage for a performance of power. It was the same type of arena, filled with the same type of people, as the gala where he had so casually dismissed Anya. Elias took the stage in the main Congress Hall. 1,000 faces looked up at him, a sea of power and influence. They expected a speech on geopolitical risk or the future of global finance. He had thrown away the prepared remarks. The teleprompter was blank. He stood at the podium, a single microphone in front of him, and waited for the room to fall silent. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the massive hall. "I am not here today to talk about market projections or strategic alliances. I am here to talk about a mistake. My mistake." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not on the program. "For many years," he continued, "I operated under the belief that success was a matter of architecture, that if you designed the right systems, acquired the right assets, and managed the right people, you could build an unshakable structure. I believed that power was a product of control. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. He saw faces he recognized. Chen, Keller, and the other board members were in the front rows. They were watching him, their expressions intent. "I was wrong," he said. "A structure is only as strong as its foundation, and the foundation of any enterprise, whether it is a business, a government, or a relationship, is not control. It is trust. And trust is not a system. It is a human connection. It is built on the one resource that cannot be bought or manufactured: attention." He felt a strange lightness as he spoke the words. It was as if he were finally releasing a pressure that had been building inside him for years. "I had a person in my life who gave me her undivided attention for 7 years. She was my partner, my strategist, and my conscience. She saw the details I was too important to see. She cared for the people I was too busy to notice. She held my entire world together, quietly, invisibly, and with a competence I failed to appreciate." He took a breath. This was the most important part. Her name is Anya Sharma. And a few months ago, in a room very much like this one, surrounded by people very much like you, I dismissed her. I treated her not as the architect of my stability, but as a functionary who could be replaced. It was the single greatest failure of my professional and personal life. The silence in the hall was absolute. No one coughed. No one shifted in their seat. 1,000 of the world's most powerful people were held captive by a simple, unadorned confession. "My world nearly collapsed as a result of that failure," he said. "It was saved not by my power or my money, but by her integrity. She had built a better foundation than I deserved. She left me a map to my own salvation, a map that forced me to see the consequences of my actions, the people in my wake, and the truth of my own blindness." He looked out at the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the room. "We talk here about building a better world, but we cannot build anything of value if we are not paying attention to the details, to the consequences, to the people who do the quiet, essential work in the shadows of our grand designs. The foundation is not the house. My house is still standing today not because of my design, but because one woman, Anya Sharma, never forgot to check the foundation." He nodded once to the silent audience. "Thank you." He turned and walked off the stage. He did not wait for the applause, though it came a moment later, a tentative, then rising wave of sound. He had done it. He had corrected the record. He had given her the public credit she was due, the honor he had denied her. He walked through the backstage corridors, ignoring the aides and organizers trying to speak to him, and went out a side door into the cold, crisp mountain air. He was alone. He had done everything he could to earn his way back. Now, all he could do was wait and see if it was enough. He found her not in a clinic or on a remote island, but in the place where it had all begun, his private residence, the one she had vacated with such sterile precision weeks ago. When he walked in, the lights were on. The air smelled of bergamot and old books again. She was in the kitchen, not doing anything, just standing by the window, looking out at the city. She was dressed in her simple, practical clothes. She had not come back to stay. She had come back to talk. "Your speech was effective," she said, without turning around. It was not a compliment, it was an assessment. "It was the truth," he replied, stopping a respectful distance away. "It was a public truth," she corrected. "There are also private ones." She turned to face him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were searching. She was taking his measure, seeing if the changes he had demonstrated were real or just another performance. "I didn't do any of it to get you back," he said quietly. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because you forced me to see. I didn't force you, she said. I gave you a choice. You could have ignored the trail I left. You could have written off the losses and hired a new team. You could have let Marcus win. You chose to follow. It was the only choice, he said. No, she said, and her voice was firm. There is always another choice. You chose the harder one, the one that required you to be humble. I did not know if you were capable of that. The unspoken truth of her plan hung in the air between them. She had prepared for either outcome. If he had failed the test, she would have disappeared, and the evidence against Marcus would have been released anonymously. She had built a response architecture that did not depend on his redemption. It was the most Anya thing he could imagine. A plan, with a contingency for his own moral failure. What happens now? He asked. It was the question that had been weighing on him since he had walked off that stage in Davos. That depends, she said. On what? On what you think we are doing here. Are we trying to rebuild what we had? Or are we building something new? The question was the heart of the matter. Rebuilding implied a return to the old dynamic, the old blindness, perhaps with a new layer of gratitude. Building something new was a different proposition entirely. It was unknown territory. What we had was broken, he said, the admission costing him nothing now. It was simply a fact. It was built on my ignorance and your silence. I don't want to rebuild that. I want to build something new, with you, as a partner, a real partner. He had said the word before, on the phone to the board members, on the stage at Davos. But he had never said it to her, directly. It felt like the most important word he had ever spoken. She was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on his. He did not try to fill the silence. He waited. He had learned, at last, how to wait. A partnership has terms, she said finally. Clear terms, agreed upon by both sides. Name them, he said without hesitation. 1, she said, holding up a finger. My work is not invisible. All of it is documented. All of it is recognized. I am not your shadow. Agreed, he said. 2, the work we do in the margins, the work you saw in the archive, the support for the people our business affects, that is no longer a side project. It is a core part of the business. It has its own budget, its own department, and I run it. Agreed. 3, she said, and she paused, her gaze intensifying. You will take a vacation, a real one. 4 weeks a year, completely disconnected. The system we build must be able to function without you. It cannot be dependent on a single person. Not you, not me. It has to be resilient. He was about to argue,